The beautiful thing about fear, Dr. Michael Cross said into his encrypted phone, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of a man discussing the weather, is how it makes intelligent people stupid. Take Ryan Hayes, for example, brilliant financial analyst, loving father, and now my perfect unwitting weapon. Cross stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office on the 42nd floor of Harrison Industries, watching the city spread beneath him like a chessboard, each light representing another life he could manipulate if necessary. His reflection in the glass was immaculate. Silver hair perfectly styled, $1,000 suit tailored to perfection. The kind of man who inspired trust and confidence in boardrooms around the world. 5 years of careful positioning, he continued, adjusting his gold cufflinks with practiced precision. And tomorrow, Catherine Harrison will voluntarily sign away her empire. The Hayes situation has served its purpose. Once the merger is complete, we can dispose of both loose ends permanently. The voice on the other end of the line was distorted by encryption, but Cross's smile suggested satisfaction with whatever confirmation he was receiving. Yes, the daughter's medical crisis was perfectly timed. Nothing motivates a desperate father like a child in danger. Hayes will do exactly what we need him to do, and Harrison will never see the trap until it's too late. Cross ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, his reflection now showing the cold satisfaction of a predator who had successfully cornered his prey. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of years of planning, but tonight he had one final move to make. 2 floors below, Ryan Hayes pushed his mop bucket down the executive hallway, completely unaware that his every movement was being monitored by the man who had orchestrated his downfall. The man who now held his daughter's life in his hands like a chess piece. If you've ever wondered what secrets hide in the shadows of corporate America, you're about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous truths are hiding in plain sight. Tonight's story will show you just how far some people will go to protect their empires, and how one man's courage can change everything. The fluorescent lights in the 40th floor hallway cast harsh shadows across Ryan Hayes' weathered hands as he moved through his nightly routine, the squeaking wheels of his bucket providing a rhythmic soundtrack to the quiet hours after midnight. For 18 months, he'd perfected the art of invisibility, becoming part of the building's infrastructure, noticed only when something went wrong. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the executive conference room, he could see the aftermath of another high-stakes meeting. Documents scattered across the mahogany table like fallen leaves, coffee cups abandoned mid-sip, the detritus of decisions worth billions. The merger between Harrison Industries and Continental Holdings dominated every conversation on the executive floor, a $50 billion deal that would reshape the entire tech industry. Ryan paused in his cleaning, his trained eye automatically scanning the visible documents. Old habits from a previous life, when he'd sat in rooms like this one, analyzing deals that could make or break entire companies. That was before the scandal, before his reputation was destroyed by accusations he couldn't defend, before he learned that some enemies prefer to destroy you slowly, methodically, until you're forced to disappear entirely. But invisibility had its advantages. People spoke freely around ghosts. The conference room door opened, and Dr. Michael Cross emerged, checking his phone with the casual confidence of someone who owned the world. Cross had been everywhere lately, offering expert advice and strategic insights that always seemed to align perfectly with Continental's interests. His credentials were impeccable. Harvard MBA, former partner at major consulting firms, the kind of resume that opened every door in corporate America. Cross nodded politely at Ryan as he passed, the kind of acknowledgement one gives to furniture that happens to be in the way. But Ryan caught something else in that brief glance, a flicker of recognition that was there and gone in an instant, like sunlight reflecting off a blade. His hands began to shake, the mop bucket suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, as suppressed memories clawed their way to the surface. That look, that momentary assessment, he'd seen it before, 5 years ago, in the faces of the people who destroyed his career and sent him into hiding. 3 hours earlier, Ryan had been in a very different kind of room, the pediatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital, where 8-year-old Sophie Hayes sat on an examination table, her small chest rising and falling with increasingly labored breathing. Her inhaler lay beside her, a plastic lifeline that seemed to be losing its effectiveness with each passing day. "The episodes are getting worse," Dr. Martinez was explaining, her voice gentle but clinical. "Sophie's asthma has developed some unusual characteristics that don't respond to conventional treatment. We're looking at potential underlying complications." Ryan felt his world tilt as the doctor continued discussing experimental treatments and specialist consultations, each word carrying a price tag that might as well have been written in his daughter's blood. Tens of thousands of dollars that a janitor's salary could never cover. Medical miracles available only to those who could afford them. "There's a new treatment protocol showing promising results," Dr. Martinez continued. "But insurance typically doesn't cover experimental procedures. The out-of-pocket cost would be approximately $200,000 over 18 months. The number hit him like a physical blow. Sophie's future reduced to an impossible equation. Ryan's hand instinctively went to his wallet, where a faded business card remained hidden behind Sophie's school photo. A remnant from his days as a senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, when his insights had been worth millions to the right clients. That was before Dr. Cross, before the sophisticated frame-up that had destroyed his reputation and forced him into the shadows. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd ruined his life was now positioned to profit from his desperation. "We'll figure it out," Ryan told Sophie, squeezing her hand. "Daddy always figures it out." But as they left the hospital, walking past luxury cars toward his battered Honda Civic, Ryan felt the familiar weight of impossible choices. Sophie deserved better. She deserved the chance to run and play without gasping for breath, to dream about becoming whatever 8-year-olds dreamed about these days. The night shift at Harrison Industries paid $17 an hour, just enough to cover their tiny apartment and basic expenses. Nowhere near enough for medical miracles. But it was honest work, invisible work, the kind that let him avoid background checks that might reveal his true identity. Back in the Harrison Industries building, Ryan finished his sweep of the executive hallway and began cleaning the conference room where tomorrow's critical merger vote would take place. The documents were still scattered across the table, thick folders marked with law firm letterheads and government filing numbers that made his pulse quicken with recognition. He wasn't supposed to read them. His job was to empty trash cans and polish surfaces, to be present, but not observant. But old habits died hard, and Ryan's eyes automatically scanned the visible papers as he worked, his analyst's brain processing complex financial structures, even as his hands moved through familiar cleaning motions. What he saw made his blood run cold. The same elegant complexity he'd encountered 5 years ago. The sophisticated legal frameworks that looked legitimate until you understood how they could be weaponized. The merger between Harrison Industries and Continental Holdings wasn't a standard corporate consolidation. It was a carefully constructed trap designed to transfer control while avoiding regulatory oversight. Shell companies within shell companies. Ownership transfers structured to appear beneficial while actually facilitating theft. Financial instruments that functioned more like sophisticated embezzlement than legitimate business deals. Someone was playing a very long game, and Catherine Harrison appeared to be the target rather than the beneficiary. Ryan recognized the fingerprints, the same methodology that had been used to destroy his career when he'd gotten too close to exposing the network. Dr. Cross's involvement wasn't coincidental. It was confirmation that the same organization was still operating, still collecting assets, and eliminating threats. His phone buzzed with a text message, innocuous on the surface, but chilling in its implications. Sophie's medication needs adjustment. Dr. Reeves will call tomorrow with new prescription details. Ryan stared at the message, his analyst's mind immediately recognizing the pattern. Sophie's mystery doctor, the one who'd been so helpful with her evolving treatment plan, another piece of Cross's elaborate manipulation. They weren't just stealing Catherine Harrison's company. They were using his daughter's health as leverage to ensure his cooperation. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Cross had been positioning pieces for years, creating dependencies and vulnerabilities that could be activated when needed. Ryan was just another asset in an extensive portfolio of controlled individuals, people who would do anything to protect what they loved most. But Cross had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what a father would do when he realized his child was being used as a weapon against him. The next morning brought unseasonably warm October air and the kind of Manhattan traffic that made even billionaires late for critical meetings. Catherine Harrison sat in the back of her Bentley, reviewing merger documents on her tablet, while her driver navigated the gridlock. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency had built Harrison Industries from a struggling software company into a tech empire. But something about the Continental deal felt fundamentally wrong. Every instinct she'd developed over 15 years in corporate warfare was screaming warnings. But the financial projections were undeniably attractive, and Dr. Cross's analysis had addressed most of her concerns with elegant precision. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being managed, guided toward a decision that served someone else's interests. "Ma'am?" Her assistant's voice came through the car's intercom. "Dr. Cross is already in the conference room with the final compliance documentation. He says everything is ready for the board vote." Catherine frowned. Cross had been remarkably helpful throughout the merger process, appearing at exactly the right moments, with solutions to problems she hadn't even identified yet. His credentials were impeccable, his connections invaluable, his advice consistently profitable. So why did she feel like a fly being led into an increasingly sophisticated web? The Bentley pulled into the underground parking garage, Catherine's reserved spot directly adjacent to the private elevator. As she gathered her materials, she noticed a maintenance worker emptying trash cans near the elevator bank, his movements efficient and unobtrusive, the kind of background presence that wealthy people learned not to see. But something about him seemed familiar. When their eyes met briefly, she caught a flash of intelligence that seemed at odds with his humble position. He looked away quickly, returning to his work with practiced invisibility. But Catherine filed the observation away, her survival instincts honed by years of corporate combat. The emergency board meeting was called for 10 a.m. Catherine's last-minute concerns about the merger structure had created a minor crisis among the directors who'd already committed to the deal. The conference room was packed with 12 board members, teams of lawyers, and representatives from Continental Holdings, all crammed into a space designed for half that number. Dr. Cross sat at Catherine's right hand, his presence somehow both reassuring and unsettling. He'd been invaluable over the past weeks, his analysis addressing her concerns with mathematical precision, his Washington connections smoothing regulatory hurdles that could have delayed the deal indefinitely. "Catherine," Continental's CEO was saying, "I understand your caution, but we're operating under significant time pressure. The market conditions that make this merger advantageous won't last indefinitely. We need definitive action today." She studied the faces around the table, all successful people who'd built careers on reading situations and exploiting advantages. But someone in this room was lying. Someone was playing a game she didn't fully understand, and the stakes were higher than anyone realized. "I need one more review of the regulatory compliance documentation," Catherine said carefully, "particularly the antitrust implications of the proposed ownership structure." The room erupted in protests. Continental's team arguing about market windows and federal deadlines, her own board members expressing concern about appearing indecisive to investors and competitors. Through it all, Dr. Cross sat quietly, his expression supportive but unreadable. Actually, Cross said during a brief lull in the arguments, there might be a way to address everyone's concerns simultaneously. He activated the conference room's presentation system, displaying a complex flowchart that somehow made the merger structure look both simpler and more sophisticated. If we restructure the ownership transfer through these intermediate holding companies, Cross explained with practiced authority, we can accelerate regulatory approval while maintaining all the beneficial aspects of the original agreement. Catherine stared at the presentation, her unease growing exponentially. The restructure was elegant, almost too elegant. The kind of financial engineering that looked brilliant until you realized it was designed to hide something fundamental. Every instinct she'd developed over 15 years was screaming warnings, but the logic appeared flawless. Before she could voice her concerns, the conference room door burst open with explosive force. Ryan Hayes stood in the doorway, still wearing his maintenance coveralls, his face pale but determined. Every head in the room turned toward him with expressions ranging from confusion to outrage. The sudden silence was thick with shock and growing anger. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Clause 47 of Dr. Cross's restructured merger agreement violates the Sherman Antitrust Act." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine felt her world tilt as she processed what had just happened. A janitor had just walked into the most important meeting of her life and challenged a billion-dollar deal in front of the most powerful people in American business. Dr. Cross was the first to recover, his voice smooth and dismissive. "Security, please escort this man out immediately. This is highly inappropriate and potentially criminal interference." But Catherine held up her hand, something in the janitor's eyes stopping her from calling for help. There was intelligence there, certainty, the kind of knowledge that couldn't be faked or improvised. "What did you say?" she asked quietly. Ryan took a deep breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff from which there would be no return. Clause 47 in the restructured agreement Dr. Cross just presented creates a monopolistic control mechanism that violates federal antitrust law. The intermediate holding company structure is designed to circumvent regulatory oversight. If you sign this deal as structured, you'll face criminal charges within 6 months. The room exploded, voices raised in outrage and disbelief, demands for security, threats of lawsuits for corporate espionage and industrial sabotage. But Catherine's attention was focused entirely on the man in coveralls who just potentially saved her from making the biggest mistake of her life. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Ryan met her gaze, and for a moment the boardroom fell away, leaving only truth hanging in the air between them. "Because 5 years ago, I helped design the legal framework that Dr. Cross is using to steal your company." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Catherine felt her breath catch as pieces of a puzzle she didn't know existed began falling into place. Dr. Cross's expression had shifted, the warm advisor mask slipping just enough to reveal something cold and calculating underneath, like ice cracking to reveal dark water beneath. "This is absurd," Cross said, his voice carrying just a hint of strain beneath its polished surface. "We're taking strategic advice from maintenance staff now. This man is clearly experiencing some form of mental health crisis." But Catherine was studying Ryan's face, seeing past the maintenance uniform to the intelligence burning in his eyes. Recognizing the particular kind of knowledge that came from intimate familiarity with complex financial systems. "Everyone out," she said quietly, her voice carrying the absolute authority that had built her empire. "Except you," she pointed at Ryan, then turned to Cross. "And you, the rest of you, give us 10 minutes to sort this out." The room emptied slowly. board members and lawyers filing out while shooting curious glances at the unlikely trio left behind. Continental's representatives looked furious, but they had no choice except to wait in the hallway and wonder what was happening behind closed doors. When the door clicked shut, Catherine leaned back in her chair, her mind racing through implications she was only beginning to understand. "Start talking," she said to Ryan. "All of it, and don't leave anything out." Ryan looked at Dr. Cross, who was watching him with the kind of predatory stillness that made his skin crawl. The mask was still in place, but cracks were showing, tiny fissures that revealed the calculating intelligence beneath the helpful advisor persona. "My name is Ryan Hayes," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "And 5 years ago I was a senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, specializing in merger arbitrage and regulatory compliance. I helped design some of the legal structures that are being used in this deal." "That's impossible," Cross interjected smoothly, his tone reasonable and concerned. "I would certainly know if someone with that background was working as maintenance staff in this building. This man is clearly suffering from some form of delusional episode." "Would you?" Ryan asked, and something in his tone made Catherine's blood run cold. "Because I'm starting to think you know exactly who I am, Dr. Cross, just like you knew exactly what you were doing when you recommended this specific merger structure." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Catherine felt like she was watching two chess masters reveal their opening moves, neither quite ready to show their full hand, but both aware that the real game was just beginning. "I think," she said carefully, "that I need to understand what's really happening here. Ryan, continue." Ryan nodded, his decision made. The moment of truth he'd been avoiding for 5 years finally arriving. 5 years ago, I uncovered evidence of a massive financial fraud scheme, a network of shell companies and holding corporations being used to systematically acquire and strip valuable assets while avoiding regulatory oversight. When I tried to report it to federal authorities, I was framed for securities fraud and driven out of the industry. He turned to look directly at Cross, whose expression had gone completely neutral, the helpful advisor mask now replaced by something that resembled a blank wall. "I never found out who was running the network, but I recognize the methodology. The same techniques are being used in your merger deal, which means either you're incredibly unlucky or you're working for the same people who destroyed my career." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine as she processed the implications. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message that made her blood freeze. "Catherine, terrible news about the Hayes family emergency. Young Sophie has been rushed to the hospital with a severe asthma attack. Thought you should know given recent events. Michael." Ryan's phone buzzed at exactly the same moment, his face going white as he read an identical message. Catherine watched his transformation from composed analyst to terrified father. And in that instant, she understood that whatever game was being played, it had just become intensely personal. "I have to go," Ryan said, his voice barely controlled. "My daughter, she's in the hospital." Dr. Cross stood smoothly, his expression shifting seamlessly to one of concerned sympathy, the mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Of course, family must come first. These business matters can certainly wait until more appropriate circumstances." But as Ryan rushed toward the door, Catherine caught the look that passed between the two men, brief but unmistakable. Dr. Cross's mask had slipped again, just for an instant, and what she saw underneath made her blood freeze. He'd been expecting this. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Ryan's daughter's emergency had arrived at exactly the moment when he was about to expose something that could destroy the merger and implicate Cross in criminal conspiracy. Catherine made a decision that would change everything. She followed Ryan Hayes out of the boardroom, leaving Dr. Cross alone with his carefully constructed lies and the growing certainty that his perfect plan was beginning to unravel in ways he hadn't anticipated. The real game was just beginning. St. Mary's Hospital at midnight was a cathedral of fluorescent light and muffled desperation. Catherine had never been in a pediatric emergency room before, and the sight of children connected to machines and monitors made her chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. She found Ryan in the family waiting area, hunched over his phone, his maintenance uniform wrinkled and stained with sweat. "How is she?" Catherine asked quietly, taking the chair beside him. Ryan looked up, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to understand what was happening," Catherine said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "The timing of your daughter's emergency. It wasn't coincidental, was it?" Ryan's laugh was bitter and broken. "Nothing's been coincidental for 5 years. I thought if I stayed invisible, kept my head down, and didn't make waves, they'd leave us alone. But they never really stop watching, do they?" Before Catherine could respond, a doctor emerged from the treatment area, her expression professionally neutral, but tinged with concern. "Mr. Hayes, we've stabilized Sophie, but I need to discuss some unusual aspects of her condition." Ryan stood, his body tense with anticipation of devastating news. "What kind of unusual?" "Her inhaler, the one she's been using for the past month. The medication composition doesn't match what was prescribed. Someone has been systematically altering her medicine." The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. Catherine watched him sway as the implications sank in. Someone had been deliberately poisoning his daughter, weakening her, making her dependent on medical intervention that they controlled. "That's impossible," Ryan whispered. "I fill her prescriptions myself, at the same pharmacy we've used for years." "I'm afraid the evidence is conclusive," the doctor continued. "The good news is that once we switched to proper medication, her breathing improved dramatically. She should make a full recovery, but we'll need to keep her for observation." Catherine felt pieces clicking into place, a pattern of manipulation so sophisticated it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. "Dr. Cross," she said quietly. Ryan turned to look at her, understanding dawning in his eyes like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "He's been playing all the angles, hasn't he? The helpful advisor, the concerned colleague, who just happened to know about Sophie's condition." "But why?" Catherine asked. "What does he gain from hurting your daughter?" "Control," Ryan said simply. "Desperate people make poor decisions. Grateful people ask fewer questions. If he could position himself as Sophie's savior, I'd be in his debt, willing to do whatever he asked to keep her safe." Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Cross expressing deep concern about Ryan's family emergencies and offering to help with any medical expenses. The timing was perfect. The offer generous, exactly what a grateful father would want to hear from a compassionate colleague. "He's still playing the game," she said, showing Ryan the message. "Even now, he's trying to position himself as the solution to a problem he created." Ryan stared at the phone, his expression shifting from exhaustion to something harder, more dangerous. "5 years ago, when they destroyed my career, I thought it was about money or corporate politics. But it was never about the fraud I uncovered, was it? It was about building a network, creating a system where they could manipulate anyone, control anyone, by threatening what they loved most." Catherine felt a chill as she realized the scope of what they were facing. Not just corporate fraud, but something much more systematic, more personal. Dr. Cross wasn't just stealing her company, he was collecting people, building a network of controlled assets who would do anything to protect their families. How many others, she wondered aloud. How many people has he manipulated? How many families has he threatened? "Enough to build an empire," Ryan said quietly. "And if we don't stop him, he'll keep adding to his collection until he owns everything that matters." Through the hospital window, they could see the Manhattan skyline, towers of glass and steel reaching toward the stars, like monuments to ambition and power. Somewhere in that forest of light, Dr. Cross was probably planning his next move, confident that his carefully laid plans would proceed without interference. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what a father would do to protect his child, and what a woman would risk to save her life's work. Catherine pulled out her secure phone, the one she used for the most sensitive corporate communications. "I'm calling my head of security, Marcus Wright. He's former FBI, specializes in corporate espionage and financial crimes." "Cross will be expecting that," Ryan warned. "He'll have prepared for standard investigative approaches." "Then we don't use standard approaches," Catherine replied, her voice taking on the steel that had built her empire. "We use what he doesn't expect, the truth." Within an hour, Marcus Wright arrived at the hospital, a compact man with watchful eyes and the kind of quiet competence that came from years of hunting sophisticated criminals. Catherine had hired him 3 years ago when a competitor had tried to steal proprietary technology. His background check had been more thorough than most federal investigations. "Ms. Harrison," Wright said, settling into a chair across from Catherine and Ryan. "You mentioned urgent corporate security concerns." Catherine gestured toward Ryan. "Marcus, meet Ryan Hayes, former senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, currently working maintenance at our building, and possibly the key to exposing the biggest corporate fraud scheme in recent history." Wright's expression didn't change, but Catherine caught the subtle shift in his posture that indicated full attention. "Go ahead, Mr. Hayes." Ryan took a deep breath, then began recounting his story from the beginning. His work at Goldman Sachs, the fraud network he'd uncovered, the sophisticated frame-up that had destroyed his career. Wright listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a small tablet. "The methodology is consistent," Wright said when Ryan finished. "Shell companies, regulatory arbitrage, controlled manipulation of key personnel. It's sophisticated enough to suggest institutional backing. Dr. Cross has been positioning himself as my primary advisor for months," Catherine added, "always appearing at exactly the right moment with solutions to problems I didn't know I had." Wright nodded thoughtfully. "Classic long-term positioning. He's been studying your decision-making patterns, learning your psychological triggers, preparing to guide you toward choices that serve his agenda." "Can you prove it?" Ryan asked. "Can you build a case that will stand up in court?" "That depends," Wright replied, "on how deep you're willing to go. Exposing this kind of network means challenging people with enormous resources and political connections. They won't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens them." Catherine and Ryan exchanged glances, both understanding the implications. This wasn't just about saving her company or clearing his name. It was about taking on an organization that had operated in the shadows for years, collecting power and influence like a spider, building its web. "We're already targets," Catherine said finally. "Cross made that clear when he arranged Sophie's medical emergency. Running won't protect us. The only way forward is through." The next 48 hours became a masterclass in corporate warfare. Wright's investigation revealed layers of deception that went far beyond simple financial fraud. Dr. Cross hadn't just been advising Catherine. He'd been systematically infiltrating the boards and executive teams of dozens of major corporations, always appearing as the helpful expert who could solve complex problems. "Look at this pattern," Wright said, spreading documents across Catherine's private conference room. "Cross or his associates have been involved in at least 15 major mergers over the past decade. In every case, the acquired company was stripped of assets within 2 years, while the acquiring company mysteriously transferred ownership to shell corporations." Ryan studied the financial structures, his analyst's mind recognizing the elegant complexity he'd encountered years ago. It's the same network. They've been systematically harvesting American corporations, transferring wealth to offshore accounts, while leaving regulatory authorities chasing shadows. "The scale is unprecedented," Wright continued. "We're looking at potentially hundreds of billions in stolen assets, coordinated across multiple industries and regulatory jurisdictions." Catherine felt a cold fury building in her chest. not just at the theft, but at the audacity of it. The casual way these people had treated entire companies like pieces on a chessboard, destroying lives and livelihoods in pursuit of profit. What about the personal manipulation, she asked, the threats against families? That's where it gets truly disturbing, Wright replied, pulling up another set of files. We've identified at least 30 executives whose family members experienced mysterious medical emergencies, financial crises, or legal troubles that coincidentally aligned with major business decisions. Ryan's hands clenched into fists, the scope of Cross's cruelty becoming clear. He's not just stealing money, he's collecting people, building a network of controlled assets who can't escape because he holds their families hostage. Which brings us to the immediate problem, Wright said. Cross knows his merger plan has been exposed. He'll be moving to minimize damage and eliminate threats. We need to assume that all of you are in immediate danger. As if summoned by their conversation, Catherine's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Cross. She looked at Ryan and Wright, then answered, putting the call on speaker. Catherine. Cross's voice was warm and concerned. I've been thinking about our interrupted meeting. Perhaps we should schedule a private dinner to discuss the merger terms in a more relaxed setting. I have some ideas that might address your concerns. The invitation sounded perfectly reasonable, exactly what a helpful advisor might suggest to resolve business tensions. But Catherine could hear the subtle undertone of command, the expectation that she would comply without question. That's very thoughtful, Michael, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. But I think I need more time to review the documentation. Perhaps we should postpone any decisions until next week. There was a pause, barely perceptible, but long enough for Catherine to sense Cross's surprise and growing concern. Of course, though I should mention that Continental's board is becoming impatient. Market conditions won't wait indefinitely. I understand, Catherine said. Thank you for your patience. After ending the call, the three of them sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. Cross was clearly growing desperate, which made him more dangerous, but also more likely to make mistakes. He's going to escalate, Wright said quietly. When people like this feel cornered, they tend to abandon subtlety in favor of direct action. The escalation came sooner than expected. Catherine was reviewing security footage in her office when her assistant burst in, her face pale with panic. Ms. Harrison, she stammered. There's been an incident. Someone tried to break into Mr. Hayes' apartment. His neighbor called the police, but the intruders escaped before they arrived. Catherine felt her blood turn to ice. Where is Ryan now? Downstairs in the security office with Mr. Wright. They're reviewing building surveillance to see if the same people have been watching our offices. Catherine rushed to the security office, finding Ryan and Wright hunched over multiple monitors, displaying footage from various cameras around the Harrison Industries building. The images showed the same black sedan parked across the street at different times over the past week, always positioned to observe the main entrance. They've been conducting surveillance, Wright explained, professional level, rotating vehicles and personnel to avoid detection. This isn't random corporate espionage, it's a coordinated intelligence operation. Ryan's face was grim as he studied the footage. They're not just trying to steal information, they're mapping our routines, identifying vulnerabilities. Cross is preparing for something big. Catherine's secure phone rang, the caller ID showing her head of legal, Patricia Adams. Catherine. Patricia's voice was tight with controlled panic. I need you to come to my office immediately. We have a serious problem. 10 minutes later, Catherine, Ryan, and Wright were in Patricia's office, listening to news that made their blood run cold. Federal investigators showed up an hour ago, Patricia explained. They have a warrant to seize all documents related to the Continental merger. Someone has filed a formal complaint alleging securities fraud and regulatory violations. Cross, Ryan said immediately. He's flipping the script, accusing us of the crimes he's committing. It gets worse, Patricia continued. The complaint specifically names Ryan Hayes as a key figure in an alleged conspiracy to manipulate merger terms for personal profit. They have documentation that appears to show him receiving payments from offshore accounts. Catherine felt the room spin. Cross wasn't just trying to steal her company. He was systematically destroying everyone who threatened him, using the legal system as a weapon to eliminate opposition. The evidence is fabricated, Wright said with certainty, but it's sophisticated enough to fool investigators who don't understand the underlying conspiracy. Cross is using our own legal system to protect himself while attacking us. How long do we have? Catherine asked. Hours, maybe less, Patricia replied. Once the investigation becomes public, the merger will be suspended indefinitely, and anyone associated with it will be considered a potential criminal. Your reputation, your company, everything you've built will be destroyed. Catherine looked at Ryan, seeing the same determination in his eyes that had driven him to challenge a room full of billionaires. They were facing an enemy who controlled the narrative, who had spent years building unassailable positions of power and influence. But they had something Cross didn't expect: the truth and the willingness to risk everything to expose it. Then we don't wait for the investigation, Catherine said, her voice carrying the steel that had built her empire. We go public first. We expose everything before Cross can control the story. The emergency press conference was scheduled for 4 p.m. in the main auditorium of Harrison Industries. Catherine had called in every favor she had with financial journalists and industry analysts, promising revelations that would reshape understanding of corporate America. Ryan stood beside her on the stage, no longer hiding behind a maintenance uniform, but wearing one of Wright's suits, his transformation from invisible janitor to whistleblower complete. In his hands was a thick folder containing 5 years of research, evidence that could destroy the most sophisticated criminal network in corporate history. The auditorium was packed, reporters from every major financial publication, cameras from business networks, live streams that would carry their words around the world in real time. Catherine felt the weight of the moment, knowing that the next hour would determine not just her company's future, but the fate of everyone Cross had manipulated and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "Thank you for coming. What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you think you know about corporate mergers and acquisitions." She gestured toward Ryan. "This is Ryan Hayes. 5 years ago, he was a senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, who uncovered evidence of massive financial fraud. Today, he's going to expose the criminal network that destroyed his career and threatens the integrity of American business." Ryan stepped forward, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Dr. Michael Cross, currently serving as strategic advisor to Harrison Industries, is the center of a criminal conspiracy that has stolen hundreds of billions of dollars from American corporations over the past decade. The auditorium erupted in questions and shouts, but Catherine held up her hand for silence. "We have documented evidence of systematic corporate theft, regulatory fraud, and personal manipulation spanning multiple industries. The merger between Harrison Industries and Continental Holdings is just the latest attempt by this network to acquire and strip valuable assets." On screens throughout the auditorium, Wright began displaying the evidence they'd gathered: financial documents showing the flow of stolen assets through shell companies, communications proving coordination between supposed competitors, medical records documenting the suspicious illnesses that had affected family members of targeted executives. "The scope of this conspiracy is unprecedented," Ryan continued, his voice gaining strength as he exposed the network that had tormented him for years. Dr. Cross and his associates have been systematically infiltrating corporate boards, manipulating merger terms, and using personal threats to control key decision-makers. The questions came fast and urgent, reporters recognizing the significance of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another corporate scandal. It was the exposure of a shadow system that had operated with impunity for years. "Do you have proof of direct criminal activity?" asked a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Ryan opened his folder, pulling out documents that Wright had helped authenticate. "We have bank records showing the transfer of stolen assets, communications proving coordination between Dr. Cross and offshore entities, and medical evidence that family members of targeted executives were deliberately poisoned to create leverage." The auditorium fell silent, the gravity of the accusations sinking in. Catherine felt the shift in the room, the moment when skepticism transformed into understanding, when the audience realized they were witnessing history. "Where's Dr. Cross now?" asked another reporter. "We don't know," Catherine admitted, "but we have reason to believe he's preparing to flee the country. Federal authorities have been notified, and arrest warrants are being prepared." As if summoned by their words, the auditorium doors burst open. Dr. Cross himself entered, flanked by two men in expensive suits who had the hard-eyed look of professional security. The room erupted in chaos as cameras turned toward the unexpected arrival, reporters shouting questions, while security personnel moved to intercept the intruders. But Cross raised his hand, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, with the same calm authority that had commanded boardrooms for years. "Please, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. These accusations are the desperate fantasies of a disgraced analyst and a CEO whose company is failing." Catherine felt her blood freeze as Cross's mask finally dropped. No longer the helpful advisor, but something cold and predatory. A man who had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation and control. "Ryan Hayes was terminated from Goldman Sachs for securities fraud," Cross continued, his voice reasonable and concerned. "His current accusations are simply an attempt to deflect attention from his own criminal activities. The evidence will show that he has been systematically embezzling funds from Harrison Industries while fabricating conspiracy theories to cover his tracks." The reporters were in chaos, cameras swinging between Catherine and Cross, trying to process two completely contradictory narratives. Cross had arrived prepared for this moment, ready to destroy their credibility with the same systematic precision he'd used against his other victims. But Ryan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the confusion with absolute clarity. "If I'm a criminal, Dr. Cross, then explain this." He held up a document that made Cross's face go pale. "This is a communication from your organization to the medical team treating my daughter. Instructions on how to alter her medication to create the appearance of worsening asthma." The auditorium fell silent, the cold calculation required to poison a child's medicine, shocking even the most cynical reporters. Cross's mask slipped for just an instant, revealing the predator beneath. "That document is fabricated," Cross said, but his voice had lost its confident authority. "Is it?" Wright emerged from the side of the stage. "Because we have the original from your encrypted server, along with similar communications regarding at least 15 other children whose parents were targeted for manipulation." Cross's composure finally cracked, the helpful advisor persona dissolving to reveal something genuinely frightening. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he snarled. "This organization has resources you can't imagine, connections that reach into every level of government and business. Destroying me won't stop what's coming." But even as he spoke, the auditorium doors opened again. Federal agents in bulletproof vests entered with weapons drawn. Cross's security detail immediately raised their hands, professional enough to recognize when they were outgunned. "Dr. Michael Cross," the lead agent announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, securities fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Cross looked directly at Catherine and Ryan, his expression a mixture of rage and grudging respect. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "But there are others. There will always be others." "Maybe," Catherine replied, "but now people will be watching for them." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of congressional hearings, federal investigations, and media coverage that elevated Ryan from invisible janitor to national hero. The exposure of Cross's network led to arrests across multiple industries, with dozens of executives coming forward to describe years of manipulation and control. Sophie recovered completely, her breathing returning to normal once the poisoned medication was eliminated from her system. The experimental treatment that had seemed impossibly expensive was now covered by a victims' compensation fund, established with assets recovered from Cross's criminal network. Catherine stood in her office, watching Ryan work at his new desk in the adjacent room. His official title was Chief Security Analyst, but his real job was rebuilding Harrison Industries into a company that could never again be vulnerable to the kind of sophisticated manipulation they'd survived. "The preliminary settlement offers are in," Wright reported, entering her office with a thick folder. "Between the federal recovery actions and civil lawsuits, you're looking at approximately $2 billion in recovered assets, enough to make Harrison Industries the most financially secure tech company in the world." Catherine nodded, but her attention was focused on the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, other networks like Cross's were probably operating, building their own webs of manipulation and control. But now there were people watching, people who knew what to look for. "Catherine," Ryan's voice came from the doorway. "Sophie's here for our lunch date. I hope that's still okay." She turned to see Sophie Hayes bouncing excitedly beside her father, healthy and vibrant, clutching a folder of drawings she'd made for Catherine's office. The sight of them together, father and daughter reunited and safe, made Catherine's chest tight with emotions she was still learning to recognize. "Of course," Catherine said, kneeling to Sophie's level. "I've been looking forward to seeing your new artwork." Sophie beamed, opening her folder to reveal a drawing of 3 figures standing together in front of a tall building. "This is you and Daddy and me," she explained proudly. "You're all heroes." Catherine looked at the drawing, then at Ryan's face, seeing the same warmth and possibility that had been growing between them over the past weeks. Their relationship had evolved from professional necessity to something deeper, built on shared danger and mutual respect, growing into love through crisis and triumph. "I have an idea," Catherine said. "Why don't we make this a family tradition? Sophie can come to lunch every Friday, and we can all work on making the company better together." Sophie clapped her hands in delight, but Ryan's expression was more complex, filled with gratitude and something that looked like wonder. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose on your professional environment." "Ryan," Catherine said, her voice soft but certain, "you saved my company. You saved my life. The least I can do is make sure your daughter has a place where she knows she's welcome and protected." She paused, then added more quietly, "Besides, I'm hoping this becomes more than just a professional environment. For all of us." Ryan's smile was answer enough, the transformation from desperate janitor to beloved partner complete. They had both lost so much to Cross's manipulation. Careers, reputations, years of their lives spent in hiding and fear. But they had found something together that was worth more than any stolen fortune. Trust, love, and the kind of family that chooses itself rather than accepting what it's given. 6 months later, the Harrison Industries annual shareholder meeting was packed beyond capacity. Investors and media representatives eager to hear how the company had not only survived its near destruction, but emerged stronger than ever. Catherine stood at the podium, her confidence absolute, her vision for the future crystal clear. "This year has taught us that our greatest strength isn't our technology or our market position," she said. "It's our people, our commitment to protecting each other and building something worth defending." In the front row, Ryan sat with Sophie on his lap, both of them beaming with pride as Catherine outlined the company's new security protocols and ethical standards. The measures they'd implemented would make it virtually impossible for another cross-style network to infiltrate the company. But more importantly, they had created a culture where truth was valued over profit, where people protected each other rather than exploiting vulnerability. "I want to introduce someone who embodies these values," Catherine continued. "Our chief security analyst, Ryan Hayes, who risked everything to expose the criminal network that threatened our company and our industry." Ryan stood, acknowledging the applause, while Sophie waved enthusiastically at the crowd. His transformation was complete, no longer hiding his intelligence or minimizing his worth, but standing as an equal partner in building something that mattered. After the meeting, as the auditorium emptied and the crowds dispersed, Catherine found herself alone with Ryan and Sophie in her office. The city spread beneath them, towers of glass and steel reaching toward the sky like promises of what could be built when people work together rather than against each other. "What are you thinking about?" Ryan asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "The future," Catherine replied. "All the companies and families out there who might be facing what we survived. All the people who need someone to stand up for them." Sophie looked up from her coloring book, where she was drawing another picture of their unconventional family. "Are you going to help them, like Daddy helped you?" Catherine smiled, kneeling to look at Sophie's latest masterpiece, a drawing of the three of them standing in front of Harrison Industries, but this time surrounded by other families, other people who looked happy and safe. "That's exactly what we're going to do," Catherine said. "Your daddy and I are going to make sure that no one else has to face what we faced alone." Ryan reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy intimacy that had grown between them. "Together," he said simply. "Together," Catherine agreed, looking at the drawing of their expanded family, their community of protection and care. They had started as strangers, separated by class and circumstance, but they had become something more powerful than either could be alone. Partners in building a world where love was stronger than manipulation, where truth was more valuable than profit, where a single father's courage could change everything. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility. Somewhere in the city, other families were going home to dinner and homework and bedtime stories. Safe because three people had chosen to stand together against the darkness. Sophie held up her completed drawing, showing Catherine and Ryan surrounded by dozens of other families, all connected by lines that looked like light. "This is what happens when heroes stick together," she announced, with the wisdom that only children possess. Catherine and Ryan looked at each other, then at the little girl who had brought them together, and knew that she was absolutely right. Heroes weren't born in corporate boardrooms or Ivy League schools. They were made in moments of choice, when ordinary people decided that protecting each other was worth any risk. The war against corruption would continue. There would always be other networks, other predators seeking to exploit the vulnerable. But now there were guardians watching, families united, love strong enough to face any darkness. And in a corner office high above the city, three people who had found each other against impossible odds began planning how to make the world a little bit safer for everyone who needed protection. One family, one company, one act of courage at a time. The Harrison Foundation launched 3 months later, with Ryan as Director of Corporate Security Education and Catherine as Chairman of the Board. Their mission was simple but revolutionary: teach other companies how to identify and prevent the kind of sophisticated manipulation they had survived. Sophie served as their unofficial mascot, her drawings decorating the Foundation's offices and reminding everyone why their work mattered. "Daddy," Sophie said one evening as they walked home through Central Park, her small hand secure in his. "Mrs. Patterson at school said her daddy's company is asking for help. Can we help them too?" Ryan looked down at his daughter. healthy and vibrant, her inhaler now just a precaution rather than a lifeline. Of course we can. Sweetheart. That's what families do. They help each other. Catherine fell into step beside them, her transformation from isolated CEO to protective partner complete, the engagement ring on her finger catching the last rays of sunset. Speaking of family, she said, her voice warm with anticipation. I spoke with the adoption attorney today. The paperwork should be finalized next month. Sophie squealed with delight, throwing her arms around Catherine's legs. Really? You're really going to be my mama? Really? Catherine confirmed, lifting Sophie up and spinning her around. If you'll have me. As they walked through the park, past families having picnics and children playing, Ryan felt the profound peace of a man who had found his place in the world. No longer invisible, no longer afraid, but surrounded by love and purpose that made every struggle worthwhile. The city lights began to twinkle around them, each one representing lives and dreams and families that deserved protection from predators like Cross. Their work was just beginning, but they faced the future together. 3 hearts beating as one, ready to defend anyone who needed a hero. Sometimes the most powerful victories weren't won in boardrooms or courthouses, but in moments like this, walking home through the gathering dusk, knowing that love had triumphed over manipulation, that courage had defeated fear, and that an ordinary janitor's extraordinary heart had changed everything. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, tiny points of light that reminded Ryan of the evening 18 months ago when he'd pushed a mop bucket down a corporate hallway, invisible and forgotten, never imagining that his daughter's laughter would one day echo through penthouse offices, or that a powerful woman's love would transform his world from shadows into blazing light. Look, Daddy, Sophie whispered, pointing upward. The stars are coming out to say goodnight. Ryan squeezed both his girls closer, his heart full of gratitude for second chances and unexpected grace. Yes, sweetheart, they're beautiful. And they were.